Okay, welcome AP Euro students. This is your Chapter 20, Industrial Revolution and its Impact on European Society. All right, a couple of important focus questions. We're really going to see why Britain was the first place in the world that really experienced an industrial revolution. What led to that in Britain. We're going to talk about how it spread from Great Britain to the continent and to the United States. The effects of industrialization, of course, and social classes and all that good stuff. I got some power looms in the English textile factory. Doesn't look very crowded there. All right, let's look at these origins. Well, before you can have an industrial revolution, you certainly have to have an agricultural revolution, which Europe and England in particular are going to have. What this essentially means is that they are having new agricultural techniques like the enclosure, the partitioning of land, and making land more efficient so that it takes fewer people to, really to create the supply needed to feed everybody. So then you have extra labor that you don't need. And so you want to do something with that extra labor, and we get some innovations that happen. And next thing you know, boom, we're looking at an industrial revolution. You also have to have supply of capital. All right, you gotta have this money, and that comes from profits made from the cottage industries and trade industries. Basically, the putting out system that came before, where textiles be sent home with farmers, and they would do it in their spare time as supplemental income. You also had to have mineral resources, and Britain had those. They had large deposits of coal, which is going to, of course, run the steam engines. They had large iron ore deposits at the time. And so, that's going to enable this to happen. You also needed the government to really get behind this and create a favorable business climate. And you're going to see that in England. You're going to see it in America, where the government, subsidizes these businesses for basically the commonwealth of the people. They see it as a good thing. And so even though it's a private industry, they may use tax money to help fund it and stuff. You're also going to see the creation of markets. You're going to get basically market revolutions that have foreign and domestic demand. People are wanting to buy these industrialized goods. Come on. All right. Okay, technological changes are also a must for the Industrial Revolution. In the cotton industry, you get these innovations and inventions such as the water frame. You get Crompton's mule, Edmund Cartwright's power looms. Basically, this is going to make the production of textiles more efficient, and that would provide for more entrepreneurial opportunities because you're having a bigger profit. You're also going to make sure that you concentrate your labor inside factories. Again, you're getting rid of that putting out system. You're going to bring the farmer's wife, or you're going to bring the extra farmers into the factories and have them stay there and work there. Basically, the demand for these products becomes so high that the putting out system doesn't work anymore. It was a good system in the beginning, but it just can't keep up with demand, and farmers won't work any harder on it because they're already doing their farming stuff in the first place. So they're going to get these extra mouths, and they're going to bring them to these factories, and they're going to concentrate the labor there. The steam engine, all of this is possible because of the steam engine. Revolutionizes the production of cotton goods. You get James Watt here, who's kind of the brainchild of the steam engine. A tireless source of power. It relies on coal. So the steam engine is going to be, electricity before electricity. It's the game changer. It is the source of power in this time period. The iron industry goes through a change. Puddling, which was using coke to burn away impurities in iron, will take us from pig iron to a better iron called wrought iron. You get basically like wrought iron steel. Right, here you see an old steam engine here, or an early steam engine. All right, technological changes and new forms of industrial organization. You should remember a lot of this from American history, but the Industrial Revolution leads to a transportation revolution. You get the production and building of new and better roads and canals to link rivers to ocean ports. And then, of course, the railroad comes in and really changes the game in the 1820s, 30s, 40s. And that's going to fuel economic progress. You get Richard Trevithick's steam-powered locomotive. A little bit later than him, you get George Stephenson's rocket in the 1820s. The rocket wins basically this speed race. It's going to, in the early days, the train could only move about the speed a man could walk, about 4 or 5 miles an hour. But the rocket is going to rocket down the rails at about 36 miles an hour, which was incredibly fast for that time period. That's the speed of a very fast horse, but without getting tired. Of course, this greatly accelerated the Industrial Revolution, and by 1850, you had over 6,000 miles of railroad track, which created demand for other industrial products and entrepreneurial interest. It's kind of like how the internet has opened up, you know, uh, eBay and Amazon and all these online retail stores and stuff like that. The internet has enabled that. Well, railroads enabled other businesses to emerge in that time period. It also altered people's perceptions of time, space, and nature, moving faster than what we could ever imagine moving. Beyond what anything in nature can move. Eventually, those trains are going to move a lot faster than a horse could ever imagine traveling. And it kind of kind of helps fuel our dreams for other things. The industrial factory laborers, they start putting them in time work disciplines and in imposing new values on them. You're going to start seeing kind of a harsher, the 10 to 16 sometimes hour work days. Some major early British mill cities were Liverpool and Manchester. These are going to be very highly polluted cities. You're going to see a lot of dirt and filth, very low average lifespans, sometimes 25, 26 years because of all of the pollution from these factories. Here you have an pollution map in Britain. Let's see. Let's present it, see if we can get a little better picture here. Cities with over 100,000 people are labeled. So any of these cities have over 100,000 people. And you got 2.4 million here in London. Industrial areas in these regions, those are going to be areas that are high in, have a lot of coal nearby, things like that. And you can see how the railroads are going to link to these port cities so that you can get finished products out to the world. Now, the development of factory changed the relationship between workers and employers, as workers were encouraged to adjust to a new system of discipline that forced them to work regular hours under close supervision. You're not going to get to sit there and rest. There's going to be bosses, supervisors who are constantly getting you to move. All right, so fast forward a little bit. Britain's Great Exhibition of 1851. You've essentially had the Industrial Revolution for a full 100 years by this point. And Britain's got to show off what it has. And a lot of that has come from the Industrial Revolution. And the world's first industrial fair was housed at the Crystal Palace, which covered 19 acres and showed 100,000 exhibits. Essentially, it's sort of like Zheng He's 7 Voyages in China. You're showing yourself off to the world. It displays Britain's wealth, their imperial power, because remember, they have India, they have these places that are supplying it with raw products. Britain becomes this workshop, banker, and trader of the world. And here's a reproduction of the Crystal Palace. You can see it there in the background. Again, it's prestige. Here's some more prestige on the inside. Queen Victoria, seen at the center with her family, surrounded by visitors from all over the world, Americans, and you can see probably Chinese, but Asian and people from all over the world. All right, so let's talk. So that's the origins of the Industrial Revolution taking place there in Britain. And it's going to spread, although Britain, of course, tries to keep it from spreading. Impossible to keep it out. So let's see how it spreads. It spreads to the European continent. And it develops there later for a couple of reasons. Lack of good roads. You also had an economic restriction with the guilds who are trying to protect their skilled labor work. Um, that's one thing about the Industrial Revolution. It's going to make it where you don't have to have a skilled artisan. Any Joe Blow off the street can come in, and within 5 minutes, you teach them how to run the power loom. And so, these guilds don't want it. They want to protect. It's like a union. They want to protect their people. And in other reasons, they see it as risky. Now they're going to build and improve on British successes. We certainly see that in America, but you're going to see it a little bit in the continent, European continent as well. You see the establishment of technical schools so that you can train mechanics so that it's more efficiently run, these factories. The role of government, again, they continue to fund industrialization. They're getting on board. They see this as the wave of the future. They're going to pass protective tariffs to keep their domestic factories and industries in business. If you use an American example, we would, if we're going to protect Ford and GMC or GM, we're going to put tariffs on Nissan and these Japanese factories. So that's what they do here. All right. Now, what were the centers of continental industrialization? Well, they were in Belgium, small Belgium, but it makes Belgium a power for a little while, even though they're a small country. Some of it takes place there in France, although a lot of France does remain agricultural, and of course the German states. You see changes in cotton manufacturing and metallurgy. You see the impact of the steam engine on iron and coal. You just have massive changes, sort of like you see all the changes that take place because of electricity. Electricity enables us to, you start seeing the invention of TVs that are radios that use electricity, and TVs that use electricity, and computers that use electricity. Very important stuff. All right, here is a industrialization map of Europe by 1850. You can see the industrial centers here in Great Britain, Belgium, with a little bit of France, here in the German states, and a little bit in Switzerland. All right, what you're going to find is industrialization is later coming to these areas in Eastern Europe. Of course, banks are going to arise as well, especially in England and France. All right, it's going to make its way to the United States. Our boy Samuel Slater is going to sneak away from Britain and bring the first textile factory to the United States. This will help create the American system where you have cotton and raw products from the South going north to create finished products, which of course will compete with Britain and one day surpass Britain. There's a need for transportation. We talked about how the transportation revolution is a result of the Industrial Revolution. And of course, you got to have a labor force. And in the beginning, your labor force that's available most readily is women. And they become 80% of the labor in textile factories. And you start seeing these capital intensive patterns, the investment of money into factories. Okay. Here you have a painting of the steamboat, Robert Fulton, typically credited with invention of the steamboat. A very important means of transportation for American products to get to markets, especially in the North. There were less in the South, of course. All right. We're going to try to limit the spread of industrialization to the non-industrialized world. This gives us haves and have-nots. There's a deliberate policy to prevent the growth of the mechanized industry. We're not trying to share this. Europe is trying to be the big dogs. Now, they can't keep it from America. Once it takes place in America, America is too powerful to limit them. But they're going to try to make sure that places like Africa and Asia are going to remain non-industrialized. Eastern Europe also remains largely rural and agricultural. You got India, who, as a British colony, their primary role is to export raw materials, especially things like cotton. Spinners and hand loom weavers are put out of work, cut off credit, increase land and rent prices, and raise transportation costs. And they're forced to import finished goods from Britain. Britain's going to control India. And India's not going to like it, but they're not going to get their freedom basically until after World War II. Excuse me. Oh, is that the last slide? Oh, that's weird. I feel like we skipped a few here. Okay, something happened there. Okay. All right, let's talk about the social impact, of course. This is really the third focus question we had. You see massive population growth, uh, decline of birth and death rates, and an increase in the food supply. You start seeing urbanization in some areas. You got congestion in the countryside, something known as the Great Hunger. The Irish population growth because of the reliance on the potato. But in the 1840s and early 1850s, you get the Irish potato famine, basically catastrophic population loss of about 1 million or so. So that's going to lead to e-migration, especially to the United States, of course. They went to other areas, but the United States seemed to be one of the more popular destinations. There's a lot of controversy that surrounds the Industrial Revolution as far as is it good or bad. You can certainly argue that early on there are a lot of negative aspects to it, or at least that it benefits the state more than it benefits the person in the early run. You get terrible sanitary and living conditions. Um, you got these row houses, adulteration of food. Basically, I mean, you have a lot of impure food. You have food with things that wouldn't be allowed to be sold these days. There are a lot of moral consequences of this urbanization of the urban life. You have people living 20 to a room, the spread of diseases, things like that. You see women and children having to go to work in the factories. And this guy here, Edwin Chadwick, he reports on the condition of the laboring population of Great Britain. He writes this book of it in 1842, and he sees it, the squalor, for what it is. And he's a reformer, and he advocates new public health measures. We know about reforming from APUSH and how in the similar time period, in the early 1800s, people see the negative consequences of urbanization, how it's exploiting the working class. You'll see Karl Marx in his development of socialism as a reform to the capitalist ventures of the Industrial Revolution. The cities and towns grew dramatically in Britain in the first half of the 19th century, largely as a result of industrialization. These are jobs. And as bad as they are, you can get off the farm, you can see people, you can live in the city rather than be stuck out in the country for the rest of your life. So a lot of people go to these cities. You're going to see the creation of new social classes. You got these new industrial entrepreneurs, these people who are investing in businesses, investing in factories. And these people tend to be resourceful. They have initiative, meaning they're willing to change and they're willing to try something. They have a lot of ambition. They want to be great. They do have diverse origins. There's mercantile trades. There's religious minorities. There's aristocrats even getting out of, these aristocrats basically get their money from the country. Well, now some of these aristocrats are going to invest their money and become entrepreneurs in this new thing taking over the world, this new wave, which is Industrial Revolution. The significance of industrial entrepreneurs is the creation of a new business aristocracy. Our robber barons, our captains of industry, these men who are insanely rich, and they become the new aristocracy. And they get their money from the backs of people. Well, I guess the old aristocracy did too, but they get their money from business ventures in the cities rather than in the country like it used to be. All right. Workers in the industrial age, working conditions for the industrial working class. Very harsh environments. We know that in these mills and the mines. The mines are very important because you got to get that coal out. And that's probably one of the worst places to be. You see child labor. You see women being raped without, any repercussions. These pauper apprentices talking about child labor. These small children who are expected to go in and do with smaller fingers do some of the things with spinning mechanics that'd be harder for the adults to do and more dangerous for the adults to do. Women and their working patterns, women's expectations that they work at the factory and somehow still do everything at home as well. Um, you see times where pregnant women in late stages of pregnancy are still having to work and not being allowed to rest by their bosses. Eventually, you'll get some factory acts as far as reform goes, which impact women and children first. You're going to see child labor laws. You're going to see women fight because they're having to do stuff at home too. They fight for a 10-hour workday um, because they need to be able to do things at home as well, cook and clean and things like that are forced upon them. They need a reduction of their hours in these factories because of that. And like I said, historians debating basically how did industrializations bring an improved standard of living? Because you see this widening gap between the rich and the poor. Business owners are becoming rich to a level that we've probably never really seen before in history. And yet the people who are making them rich can barely survive in a lot of cases. I think we look short-term and long-term effects there. In the short term, it's probably kind of negative. But in the long term, it does bring cheaper products, which will help lead to the emergence of a new middle class because of that. So I can see where there is, conflict amongst historians on the effects. Yeah, this is pretty famous illustration here. Living conditions of London's poor, the spread of cholera and these other diseases and stuff that come from filthy sanitation. They don't have good sewage early on in these cities. You can see this would be the smell would just knock us out these days if we were transported back in time. A lot of negatives here, but again, if we look long term, that we have enjoyed basically we've enjoyed what these people who have suffered in their time period, the fruits of their labor, if you will. Women and children in the mines, like I said. Pretty rough. Children being smaller can go down smaller holes and do stuff. There is a lot of effort at change. You get to trade union movements. You get these unionites, like as the Luddites. Basically, people realize that they only have power if they attack their factory owners in mass because it's unskilled labor, so they can easily replace you. Finally, you're going to get government action, which is vital, crucial to the reformation of the Industrial Revolution. Factory Acts between 1802 and 1819, which strengthened and expanded earlier legislation. Factory Act of 1833, I think, limits the hours people can work. Coal Mine Acts, all these are to reform this business that has been exploiting workers for a long time. Again, skilled workers, they're trying to protect themselves against the Industrial Revolution. They're not going to have just a whole lot of success there. And here's you a timeline. It begins basically with Watt's steam engine in the late 1700s. Although the Industrial Revolution, you could link back to a little bit earlier than that. And as you will see, in this time period, people are beginning to see the ill effects of it. And so you're going to see a lot of reform going on there. All right, guys, that's it. The Industrial Revolution's pretty straightforward. And you could get lost in names if you wanted to, but typically we don't throw a lot of names at you. And the names that we do throw at you are typically inventors of various products that advanced the Industrial Revolution. So remember the factors that gave Britain the edge in the Industrial Revolution, the fact that they had coal, that they had iron, that it was easy to get their goods to market, to the ports. Their streams went, they're an island. Their streams went to the ocean, so that gave them advantages. We know that Samuel Slater brings textile industry to America, and that creates a whole set of problems in America that will culminate in the Civil War, of course. Transportation revolution is a result of the Industrial Revolution. It changes England. It shrinks it. It shrinks all these places. The railroad shrinks areas, makes it easier to go far distances. And I don't know that I saw why England saw Germany as a threat, but not the United States. Very probable that that's because there had been a long-standing trade relationship between the United States and Britain, and Germany being much closer to them than the United States is probably your biggest reasons there. All right, guys, that's it in a nutshell. We'll go into a lot more detail in class, of course, and I will see you then.